Hello everybody and welcome back to another Overwatch League 2022 roster breakdown video. Today we are taking a look at the New York Excelsior, the NYXL, my favorite team in the league. My boys. Really massive changes to this roster last season and then going into the season again as well. Some massive changes. Let's take a look at this roster and talk about what they have done with their new roster for this season. So here is the 5 players they currently have publicly announced. They do have at least 6 players. That much was confirmed by Sean Miller. He came out and said that every team does have 6 players under contract. They just haven't announced it yet. So this is the 5 they have right now. This is going to be a roster that we are going to have to take a look at more later on in some later videos. But for right now, this is the 5 players that the NYXL have. In the DPS line, they have Flora and Yaki. Of course, Yaki coming over from the Florida Mayhem, Flora on this team last season. In the support line, they have Gangnam Jin and Myeonbong. Gangnam Jin is coming from the Florida Mayhem as well. Myeonbong coming over from the Boston Uprising. And currently the only rookie on this team is Kellen, who is joining this team from Talon Esports. Also played for Element Mystic for a time before that. So let's real quick just mention the changes to this team's coaching staff. Last season, this team was led by Why Not as their head coach, with IMT as an assistant coach as well. But this season, they have Kuki, formerly of the Florida Mayhem, coming over and being their new head coach, as well as Undyne, who joined the team last season. So that is the coaching staff updated for the NYXL for the season. So Kuki, a coach who I think is a pretty good head coach. He was very good in 2020. The team was not as good in 2021. Whether or not that was on Kuki, we will have to see for sure. We won't know yet, but I think it is a good move at the NYXL. This is the first time in a while I felt like they actually went after a head coach who I feel confident in, a head coach who I actually think has proven himself at the Overwatch League level, and that's one of the reasons why I'm very excited for this new NYXL lineup and coaching staff. But let's jump in and let's talk about the players they have right now, and do a little bit of speculation on where I think they're going to go for some of these other spots that I think they're going to fill. So starting with the DPS, we have Flora, we have Yaki. Flora is, of course, a very strong hit scan player. Plays the Cassidy, the Ashe, the Widowmaker, as well as some Tracer and some Sombra. So I think that Flora is a very good kind of Lip-like player. I don't think he's as good as Lip, at least at the moment. We haven't seen him play at that level yet. It's possible that he could reach Lip levels of good, at some point in his career. But as things stand right now, he isn't at that level yet. But that is the type of player that I think Flora is. He's a, Lip light, and he brings that same kind of similar hero pool to Lip, where Lip plays Sombra, Lip plays Tracer, Lip plays the hit scan role. But Lip is just an incredible kind of hard carry player who really does bring levels of excellence that we haven't yet seen from Flora, though Flora hasn't had that same team around him that we have seen from Lip since he joined the Overwatch League. So I think Flora could potentially have that potential. We just haven't seen it yet because he hasn't been surrounded by those pieces that are very strong. And when you pair him with a player like Yaki, who is a flex DPS player and one of the best tracers in the Overwatch League right now, some people could even argue that he is the best tracer in the Overwatch League. You still have someone like Striker, who I think you have to look at as well. But Yaki is an incredible tracer player. And I really like this duo between Flora and Yaki, because they're both pretty flexible players. They're not hyperflex players. Yaki is going to be your flex DPS player, right? He plays stuff like Genji and Pharah and Echo, as well as the Tracer. Those are the heroes that he kind of has in his pool. And Flora, like I said, is hit scan plus Tracer and Sombra. So I do think that they need another DPS player, at least one, to kind of round out this roster. But I really like what this team is, because I think this will give more opportunity for Yaki to play some of the roles that he's stronger on, and it'll give Flora some more opportunities to play roles that he is stronger on. We saw a lot of Flora last season on Cassidy, and I think that is one of his best heroes. I think his Tracer is very good as well. And I like having that flexibility where if you need a double hit scan meta, for example, you can play Flora on Tracer if it's like a Tracer Ashe, but you also want to have like Ashe Cassidy. You're not losing out by having Flora on the Tracer. Or if it's a Tracer Echo meta or a Tracer Genji meta that we get at some point in Overwatch 2, you can put Yaki on that Genji or on that Echo and put Flora on the Tracer, and you're not losing out on the play that you get out of kind of having a really strong Tracer player, because Flora is a good Tracer. He's not Yaki levels of Tracer, but very few people are, but he is still a good Tracer, and you're not going to lose games, in my opinion, if you're running Tracer Echo with Flora on the Tracer and Yaki on the Echo. And I think one of the biggest problems that the Florida Mayhem had last season, and I think they had it in 2020 as well, but they just managed to play around a little bit better. I think Fate was a big part of that. And I think that the region they were in was not as strong as what it became in 2021. One of the biggest problems that the Florida Mayhem have had is that BQB wasn't a super flexible player and couldn't play Tracer. So Yaki had to play Tracer, and Tracer's a really meta hero. And they didn't really have anybody they trusted to play those flex DPS roles outside of Yaki. Even when they had Checkmate last season, he didn't really get that much playtime. And so I think what we ended up seeing really from this was that they were pretty much stuck in what they were running with Yaki on the Tracer and people like, BQB on like the hit scan role or the Sombra, and they couldn't really run anything else. They didn't have the flexibility that they needed. I think that Yaki and Flora is a more flexible duo, but I do want to see another piece in this lineup. I do want to see another DPS player. I think ideally another hit scan player. Like we saw with New York last season, we saw a lot of Flora and Guangbong and Flora and Feather, because you kind of need some of that flexibility in the DPS line. So I would like to see them sign another hit scan player. I will never write off the possibility of New York bringing a player like Guangbong back. They could go for another rookie player, but I thought Guangbong was very, very good last season. And I think if he is someone who you don't expect to be your every match starter, I think he's still a potentially good piece for this lineup. Don't know if that's what they're going to go with. They could always bring in someone like XC as well. But I personally would rather have Guangbong if I was the NYXL, because you know him. He's been in the system already, so he has some chemistry already with Flora. And I think that he is just a younger talent who you don't have to worry as much about potentially not being able to play. So that's my personal opinion on it. But I think Flora Yaki really is a strong DPS duo. I think it's one of the best DPS duos right now in the league. Gives me some brief hints, some small hints of that kind of Fleta Lip DPS duo vibe. Maybe not quite as good, but could potentially be that good over time. So I'm very excited to see this lineup play, because I think there is a ton of talent in that DPS line. That they rounded out with one or two more pieces will be a really, really, really solid core in that DPS lineup. Moving on now to the support role. They have 2 flex supports right now, so I do expect them to bring in another support player, someone to play their main support role, potentially somebody like Sanguinar, but who knows for certain who they'll bring in. But in the flex support role, they have two players who are pretty well renowned for their time in the Overwatch League, and that is Gangnam Jin and Myeonbong. Gangnam Jin, like I said before, played with Florida Mayhem. Myeonbong played for the Boston Uprising. So if double flex support is really the meta that seems to be forming, and it seems to be the direction that a lot of teams are going in, then it is to be pretty expected that the NYXL would, of course, invest in getting two really good and really well-known flex supports who can both play pretty much everything you need them to play. I think that Gangnam Jin will probably be the Batiste player for this team, more so than Myeonbong. I think Myeonbong's going to be the Zen and the Ana. But I think they're both flexible enough that you can really switch it up. I don't really know who they're going to kind of have as the primary flex support yet. If I had to guess, I would guess Gangnam Jin. I just think Gangnam Jin is a little bit better. I think he has been a little bit more consistent. I feel like I just felt a little bit better about him as a player so far. So we'll see what happens and who they have as the primary starting flex support on this team. Obviously, they're going to have two, potentially for a lot of the season, if the meta develops the way that people think it's going to develop. But these are two players that I have a ton of faith in as a fan of the game, not even just as a fan of this team. As a fan of the game, I have a ton of faith in these two players because they have both been very consistent. Myeonbong was the best part of that Uprising roster in 2020 by far. That wasn't even close how much better he was than the rest of that Uprising roster in 2020. And the Uprising were a pretty good team in 2021. They were, well, I guess we haven't talked about them yet, so maybe I'm not saying a pretty good team, but they were okay. They weren't a terrible team. He didn't stand out as much as he did in 2020, I think, because the team was overall better than they were in 2020. So didn't have as much of those moments. And the same thing for Gangnam Jin, right? 2021 was not really the highlight year for both Myeonbong and Gangnam Jin. They both had exceptional rookie years and pretty average sophomore seasons. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them if they are both able to kind of return to that level of play, on a roster that on paper, kind of looks like a really strong roster. But there is definitely some concern about some dips that we saw from Gangnam Jin and Myeonbong. And maybe it was because those players were on teams that were not as strong and didn't kind of give them the same amount of opportunities that they had expected to get or hoped to get. But ultimately, I do think that these are two very strong players who bring a lot to the NYXL. They do need a main support player. They need someone that can play Lucio, Mercy, stuff like that. I don't even know if Gangnam Jin or Myeonbong are comfortable on Brig. I don't think either of them have really ever played it at a high level. Now it's Brig. You can teach Brig pretty easily. Brig is not the hardest hero to pick up, but I think that you definitely don't want to have to teach one of these players Lucio and Mercy, especially if you're a team who is going to be trying to be pretty good pretty quickly. I think it is important to have a main support player because it is pretty imperative for teams to have strong Lucio play, just in case. You never know what the meta is going to be, and you never know how much Overwatch 2's development and how much the beta could change over time, to the point where maybe we reach a point where you just need Lucio play because Lucio is the meta, and you need Lucio. So that's really my one thing with the support line, is it's not finished yet, obviously. Someone like Sanguinar to me is kind of my go-to every single time when I talk about players who I'm surprised are not in the league. I think Sanguinar is a really good player that had a really good season in 2020. I'm surprised he didn't get picked up in 2021, and I'll be surprised if he's still not in the league again in 2022 after the season that he had in 2020. But I suppose we'll see what happens with the support line. But it is very strong. It's a very good support line, and I have a lot of faith and belief in it for what we have seen from it. But like I said, this roster is not finished, so we'll wait to see who the sixth player they have is when they announce that eventually. But I expect they have a couple of other signings they're going to make as well. And the main reason for that is because in the tank line, they only have one player right now, and that is Kellen. He's a rookie player, like I said, comes from Talon Esports, and before that, he was with Element Mystic. Not for a super long time before Element Mystic disbanded, but spent a long time with Talon Esports, about a year there. So he's a main tank player. He's going to play your Winston, your Rhine. But I think you need another tank player in this lineup, primarily just because you need a veteran person to be there with Kellen, right? We know Kellen can play like the Winston and the Rhine. I'm not sure if he can play the Hog or the Sigma or any of the other off-tank heroes. And I think that it's very important that this team gets a strong off-tank player. I don't know who it'll be. I don't know who they're eyeballing to get for this team. There's a lot of options out there, obviously. There's always been some options when it comes to flex tanks. I think they would benefit by getting a veteran guy. The problem is I don't know if there's really that many left that are like strong veteran players in the off-tank role. I can't really think of many. So I don't know what their move is. They could bring in someone like Kane, who plays for Talon Esports right now, but I don't really expect them to do that. So it'll be interesting to see who they bring in to round out this roster, because there's really only so many players right now that I think look super strong and look to be on that kind of up and up level where they look to be pretty strong players. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they round it out. But I think Kellen is a good starting point for the tank lineup. He's pretty well known. He's done well in contenders. So it'll be interesting, right? This is an NYXL roster that has a lot of potential, but they need to keep hitting these same big signings with the rest of their roster, right? We look at this roster on paper, we say this is a good roster. This is a solid-looking roster. But we know there is more. They can field a starting lineup right now, right? They can field 5 players. They have Floriaki, Gundam, Jim, Young, Kellen. They can throw these 5 players out on any given day. And in an ideal meta, right, for this team, they are going to be a pretty strong and solid team, right? If we're looking at like a Tracer Cassidy meta with, or like a Tracer Echo Winston on a BAP meta, this is a really, really good lineup for that, right? Like, you'd feel really confident in their ability to do well. But what if Diva's meta? And what if the meta is double hit scan? What if it's, for some reason it's Ash Widow, right? Or Cassidy Widow. And it's Lucio as the support. Well, if that were the meta, I wouldn't feel confident about this team. So they do need to line up or fill out their lineup with some more players. They need some more pieces on this roster because right now they are not ready. Now, we know they have a 6-player signed. We don't know who it is yet, like I said. If I had to guess, they probably would sign an off-tank before they would sign a main support or a third DPS player. They could just announce all 3 of those potentially at the same time. New York usually announces all of their signings in groups. That's kind of the way they usually roll. So I am curious to see kind of what they do and what their lineup is going forward, because I think the roster is very, very interesting and looks really good to start with. But right now, they just don't have a fully rounded out roster that I can confidently say is going to be an elite level team, one of the best in the league, so on and so on. So I want to see more from this team. I think we'll get to see a very, very, very telling start for this team, considering that they open up against the LA Gladiators and the Atlanta Reign in the opening weekend. So they do have a pretty tough opening schedule. So we'll get to know pretty quickly how good this NYXL team is, even if they start 0-2. If they start 0-2 but the games are close, you can feel pretty confident that this team's good. If they start off 2-0, you will feel like, oh, this team is legit. They look really, really good. So obviously, I'm a fan of this NYXL team, so it is a little bit unfair potentially, but I do genuinely think this is an exciting looking team just based on their lineup alone. And I am very excited to see what this team brings into 2022. That is going to be all, though, from me for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. Comment down below your thoughts on this lineup, if you think it's good, bad, what types of players you think they might sign to fill out the needs that they have. Or if you even think some of those holes are really holes, let me know down below. But that's going to be all from me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.